Showtime presents the new limited series, Your Honor.
Dad, I hit somebody and I left him there.
Starring Bryan Cranston.
Don't tell anyone. I can keep you safe if no one hears about it.
There are some truths worth lying for.
I wonder who did this.
The city is waiting. Send a message.
What have you got me into here, Michael?
I need more time.
I can't do it, Dad. Any of this.
You have to, or we die.
Your Honor on Showtime. Stream the first episode for free at youtube.com/Showtime.
CVS is your one-stop shop for immunity support and more. This week, select Mucinex and Delsum cold relief products are $15.99. Visit CVS or CVS.com today. Restrictions apply. See CVS.com/weekly ad for details.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. Go to emailrevealer.com, you pick up a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, and also to all different kinds of services we can offer you, private investigation services, digital forensics, computer forensics, email tracing, locates, asset searches, whatever you need, give me a call, and we'll get you out of trouble. If this is the first time you're hearing our show, check out OppermanReport.com, because we also have a members section where you can go there and sign up, become a member. We have special exclusive content that you won't find live on Friday nights or live on Saturday afternoons, but you'll find in the members section. So it's extra content that we provide for you for a membership subscription. Okay, today we have Harold Schechter. Okay, his website is haroldschechter.com. That's SCHECHTER, haroldschechter.com. Prolific author. How many books? My God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Over 10 books. Okay, the newest one is Maneater, right? Maneater, the life of a legend of an American cannibal. We were just discussing this 2 seconds ago. Okay, now already I'm losing my mind. Yes, Maneater is the latest book from haroldschechter.com. Prolific author. Harold, are you there?
I am, yep.
Okay, Harold, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my day job is actually a professor of American literature at Queens College, one of the senior colleges of the City University of New York. I've been teaching there full time. Well, it's actually over 40 years now. I started in 1975. And about 25 years ago, I started writing historical true crime books. That's become really my area of specialization. And I guess what I'm best known for, and obviously the reason that you were kind enough to invite me onto your show.
Now, but your specialty is...
Yes. That's what it became. I began writing these books. I'm not a criminologist or a forensic psychiatrist. I really come to the writing of these books through my interest in storytelling and, why people need to hear and want to hear stories about monsters. And so the first book I wrote, Deviant, which was about Ed Gein, I guess I wrote it, over 25 years now. I'd actually been writing a book about movies and discovered something I didn't know, and that really wasn't widely known at the time, which was that both Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, two of my favorite horror movies, and then later Silence of the Lambs, were all inspired by this actual case. And I began researching that case, and that became the basis of my first book. And that book was successful, and I was encouraged to keep writing in that genre. But again, I wasn't so much interested in serial killers per se as certain kinds of real-life killers whose crimes were so monstrous that they almost seem like, and the public came to see them as these supernatural monsters. So.
Right. Now, what do you think attracts people to these stories? What is that?
Well, again, we have a fascination with horror and stories about monsters from the time we're children. I think these stories, monsters, again, not to get overly psychoanalytic about it, but in a general way, I think they embody different kinds of fears and forbidden desires and anxieties that we have, and by shaping them into stories, it's a way of gaining some kind of sense of control over our own fears. So, but the appetite for horror, the appetite for stories of crime and violence and so on and so forth, it's not only a universal human trait, but again, in terms of people's lives, it really goes back to childhood. Hansel and Gretel, the first horror story most people hear, and it's totally terrifying. So.
Yeah, and even like some of those nursery rhymes, like "Ring Around the Rosie" and about the mouse going up the clock has to do with the plague, even when the one too about the guy, it's raining, it's snoring, he bumped his head. Like what is going on with that? Like we're groomed into this in a certain way from childhood.
Well, yeah, rockabye baby,
right?
When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. But again, the world is a very fearful place to children, and telling stories again about these things in a funny kind of way, I think helps people to manage their own fears and their anxieties. You're kind of calling up the monster in your imagination, but then, you're telling a story about defeating the monster. So, and again, just shaping some of these anxieties into the form of a story gives you a sense of control over them. So, again, I'm sure there are various, obviously psychological reasons for our fascination with it. Another aspect is what certain psychiatrists call the shadow side of human nature. All of us have very dark aspects to our, that lurk behind our civilized selves. This is not to say that we're all potential murderers, but just that, there are socially dark, socially unacceptable impulses in each one of us. And this kind of material, I think, allows us to vicariously express and experience those things.
Okay, but now the guys you study and the guys you write about, these guys who actually step over that line and they become serial killers. Now, that's a unique kind of person, right? What do you think is behind that? Well,
there are different theories. In my own researches, and obviously other people have studied the subject, have come to similar conclusions. Most of those. Well, first of all, let's we need to establish that even though the phrase serial murder is of relatively recent vintage, the phenomenon that it refers to probably has existed as long as our species has. It just used to be called different things. Back in the early 20th century, they might call these people lust murderers, for example. And, that phrase lust murderers is meant to convey what is true of many very infamous serial killers, which is that they're really extreme sexual psychopaths who derive very sick, erotic pleasure from inflicting pain and torture on helpless victims. So, then the question becomes, well, what goes into the making of criminals like that? One element that is often the case not always, but often, is that they themselves were tortured in one way or another as children, physically, sexually, psychologically, one or the other, or all three sometimes. And so they grow up, feeling that the way you get pleasure in the world is by inflicting pain on others. There could be there probably are other factors involved. There's been more and more study about possible neurological factors and so on and so forth. Ultimately, it's a mystery that may or may not ever be solved. But certainly, again, a common denominator among many serial killers, is a monstrously abused childhood with a lot of humiliation involved. These are people who have been horribly humiliated from the time of their earliest years.
Well, give us an example. Ed Gein, was he humiliated as a child?
Well, yeah, two things. I mean, Gein is not, does not really, even though he's usually lumped into this class, and he did certainly apparently he definitely murdered two women, but Gein isn't a traditional lust murderer in the way, let's say, Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or the Hillside Stranglers were. Gein was basically a necrophiliac. Gein was, even the two women that Gein killed, he basically executed very, very swiftly. He wasn't interested in inflicting pain and torture on them. He didn't derive sexual pleasure from that. He was just interested in getting their corpses back to his farmhouse so that he could, dissect them and so on. But that having been said, yes, I would say from what we know about Gein's childhood, that he underwent, a lot of humiliation. He had this kind of monstrously overbearing mother who was very demeaning and humiliating to him. So
now, so you think there's a sexual motivation for most of these guys? They get sexual pleasure from numerous murders.
Well, again, the definition of serial murder keeps changing. Some people define it this way, some people define it that way. But, it's if you look at the figures who, the term serial murder, I only discovered recently, was actually originally coined in the 1930s by a Berlin detective to describe a very, very, very notorious lust killer named Peter Curtin, who was going around horribly murdering and sexually torturing, men, women, and children, not to mention animals. In our own time, it really didn't come into common usage until the 1980s, when it was first used to describe the Atlanta child murderers. But if you think of the figures from the late 20th century, that we think of as serial killers, again, Gacy, Dahmer, Bundy, the Hillside Stranglers, and so on and so forth. Yeah, these are all sexual sadists. These are all people who derive, again, very, very twisted sexual pleasure. Another one would be Joel Rifkin, from torturing and murdering their victims, and often will achieve orgasm while doing that. So yeah, I mean, it's the classic serial killer. It's a sex crime.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, how come throughout recent history, anyway, we had all these almost cartoon characters, Son of Sam, the Zodiac, you had Atlanta child murderers. They became like famous, and they had all this publicity on TV, and Hillside Strangler, Yeah. How come we don't have that anymore? The last one was Rifkin.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. There certainly have been serial killers. Where I live, there's a whole series of unsolved serial murders at this Long Island beach, Gilroy Beach.
Right.
you still do read about these cases. There was one in Atlantic City